5 years. Sometimes 5 years are an entire lifetime, and sometimes they are only a pause between two heartbeats. For Ateş, these years became a battle with his own darkness. For Mercan, they became a quiet victory of patience that never faltered. The mansion was no longer cold or silent. Now, the silence was not born of fear, but of peace. The walls, the garden, even the wind itself seemed changed. Happiness had made its home here.
Ateş.
Ateş fell in love with dawn. Every morning, he stepped into the yard and breathed deeply, as if greeting the world anew. Once, mornings frightened him. They carried the weight of his past. Now, dawn had taken on a different meaning. He did not forget what had been. No, Ateş never learned how to forget. But he learned how to strip the past of its power. His hands no longer trembled. His gaze remained deep, but the rage was gone, replaced by responsibility. He understood one simple truth. Strength is not found in shouting. Strength lives in the one who stays.
Mercan.
Mercan looked at herself in the mirror and smiled. There was no doubt left in that smile. She had found herself. She never tried to change Ateş. She simply chose not to leave. Sometimes, the greatest courage of a woman is not silence, but waiting within that silence. She was no longer just the woman he loved. She became a home, a shelter, a steady presence. In Ateş's darkest moments, she was there. No questions.
No demands.
She would rest her hand on his shoulder and say only one thing. I'm here.
The child.
Children's laughter now filled the house. A little girl. Ateş's eyes. Mercan's smile. When Ateş held his daughter for the first time, his body trembled. In that moment he understood. He was no longer just a man. He was a father. As he kissed her forehead, he made a silent promise. I will overcome everything to protect you. From a distance, Mercan watched them. Her eyes filled with tears. Not of pain, but of gratitude. Semel, too, found his own path. He did not remain in Ateş's shadow. He remained a friend. He built his own life, his own home, his own responsibilities. Yet every time he returned to the mansion, he would smile and say, Love has won in this house. It's impossible not to feel it. Time moves forward. Life never stands still. Sometimes people lose themselves along the way, and sometimes it is that very loss that leads them home. Semel and Demet. For Semel, Demet was never just an ordinary presence. She was always close. Yet for a long time, he lacked the courage to give voice to what lived in his heart. One day, he broke the silence. I hid you behind the word friend for too long, he said quietly. But my heart has loved you for a long time. Demet did not answer immediately. There was no surprise in her eyes, only relief. I was waiting too, she answered softly. They had a wedding. Simple.
Sincere.
Without unnecessary noise. But with their whole hearts. This marriage was not rushed by passion. It was love that had ripened through patience. Asli walked a long road. The hardest road of all is the one that leads out of yourself. She came to understand one quiet truth. Not every love is meant to be yours. Now she no longer envied the happiness of others. She lived her own life. And that, too, was a victory. Asli and Nazir. For a long time, Asli carried hatred in her heart. Nazir, meanwhile, looked at life from a cold distance. But sometimes fate joins two wounded souls. Nazir saw loneliness in Asli's eyes. Asli felt protection in his silence. They did not try to reshape one another. They accepted what was. Their marriage was not born of burning passion, but of peace. Muzian accepted the hardest truth of all. She understood that control is not love, and that sometimes letting go is the only way to preserve what truly matters. When she held her granddaughter in her arms, her heart found peace for the first time. Hyder and Nerman. They lost much. They made many mistakes. But in the end, they understood one simple truth. Family begins with forgiveness. Hyder softened. Nerman learned to smile again. Their happiness was quiet, without noise, but steady and real. Sisik, Melik, and Bena's mother. They had always lived in the shadows. No one expected miracles from them. Yet life often grants its most beautiful miracles to the quietest hearts. Sisik's laughter became Melik's greatest treasure. When she laughed, he forgot all his weariness. And Melik became a mountain for Sisik, silent, unshakable, dependable. They married without spectacle, without display, but with hearts overflowing. Before long, a baby's cry echoed through the house. Bena held the child to her chest and smiled through tears. "This is how life continues," she whispered. For Bena, that cry was not pain. It was a reward for yesterday's hardships, the voice of today's happiness. Where silence once lived, the breath of life settled. Bharat and Zara. Bharat always smiled. His smile lightened even the heaviest moments. Zara spoke little, but felt deeply. What drew them together was not the desire to change one another, but the ability to listen. One day, Zara cried softly. No words.
No explanations.
Bharat sat beside her. He said nothing. He simply stayed. And from that moment, love began. Bena watched from a distance. She said nothing, only whispered a prayer within her heart. Happiness does not arrive loudly, she thought. It comes like this, quietly, but true. Later, Bharat and Zara married as well. Their union was sealed by Bena's tearful blessing. Some mothers give birth to children. Others raise entire lives of happiness. Bena's mother was such a woman. She did not write destiny with her own hands, but she stood beside every love. And that is why this house held everything. Laughter, tears, and above all, happiness. Evening. The garden falls silent. Atesh and Merkin sit side by side. Their daughter sleeps inside the house. Merkin asks softly, "Are we happy?" Atesh is quiet for a moment, then answers, "We endured."
Together. And that is enough.
Merkin rests her head on his shoulder. Above them, the stars shine. Some loves begin easily. Others are born through pain. The love of Atesh and Merkin belonged to the second. This time, they gathered not because of conflicts, not because of debts left by the past. They gathered for one reason only. Their daughter turned two. The mansion filled with people once again. But now the footsteps within these walls were not cautious, they were free. Children ran through the garden. Laughter spilled over the walls. Everyone felt it. Today, in this place, no one was judging anyone. Hyder and Nerman. At the gate, Hyder paused. Once, he had entered this yard carrying too much loss. Today, there was a small gift in his hands, and silence in his eyes. Nerman stood beside him and said softly, "This time, let us come not for the past, but for our granddaughter." Hyder nodded. They entered. For a moment, Merkin froze. Then she drew her daughter close and stepped forward. "Welcome," she said calmly. There was no coldness in her voice, no forced warmth. It was acceptance. Hyder looked at the little girl. In her eyes, he saw not lost years, but life continuing. A little later, Muzian arrived. Not as before, not loudly, not with judgment. She walked quietly. Her eyes observed more than her words spoke. She approached Merkin's daughter, hesitated for a heartbeat, then said gently, "Happy birthday, little one." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of lived years. Atesh watched from a distance. He did not interfere, because some reconciliations must happen without witnesses. 1 yard, 1 life. Everyone gathered around one table. Sisik held her baby close. Melik sat beside her, smiling quietly. Bharat and Zara stood near each other. Mother Bena watched them with quiet pride. Semel held Demet's hand, a hand that no longer needed to be hidden. Everyone was where they belonged, each in their own life. Atesh lifted his daughter and stepped toward the birthday candles.
2 years, he said.
And already wiser than us, because she learned this house without pain. Merkin stood beside him. Their eyes met. There were no questions in that look. Only peace. Nazir and Asli stood slightly apart. Not in the center. Not seeking attention. Once, they had been united by anger and hurt. Today, by silence and understanding. Asli no longer carried the bitterness of the past. There was no sharpness in her gaze. Only weariness and a longing for calm. Nazir held her hand. Not tightly, but surely. Not from fear of losing, but from the desire to remain close. They were here today not as witnesses to others' happiness, but as people who had found their own. Atesh and Nazir. And there was one more moment. Atesh and Nazir met each other's eyes. Once, hatred stood between them. Suspicion. Blood from the past. Now, nothing. Atesh took the first step. No words.
No explanations.
Nazir understood and stepped forward as well. They did not embrace. They simply nodded. That was enough. Sometimes reconciliation is not the word sorry. It is a silent agreement. The war is over. Merkin noticed this and smiled quietly. Life does not erase the past, but it knows how to change its weight. Not everyone becomes friends, and not everyone must remain enemies. If two people who once stood on opposite sides can meet each other's gaze without anger, then the path was not walked in vain. In this house there were new families, new children, new beginnings. And most importantly, there was no longer Arafta. There was a home. There was life. There was a future. And the story continued. Happiness comes to everyone differently. Some find it late. Some recognize it only through pain. But life proves one truth. If the heart remains open, even the heaviest doors will not stay locked forever. Today, in this garden, the past was not forgotten, but it no longer judged. Because here, the laughter of one child made everyone equal. The candles went out. Applause rose. The garden. One table. One life. And life goes on.